So welcome everybody. On behalf of Civic Well, the Groundwater Exchange, and myself, welcome to our new series, Office Hours, which brings in experts to answer your questions. My name is Chris Austin. I'm otherwise known as Maven, and I publish the California Water News website, Maven's Notebook. For those who aren't familiar, Maven's Notebook is a website devoted to California water news. The website is updated 6 days a week with the latest water news gathered from around the web, my own coverage of meetings and events, and even breaking news whenever it occurs. I invite you to check it out at mavensnotebook.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for free daily email service to get the latest news delivered to your inbox every morning. There's a weekly version as well for those who might want a little less emails or a recap of the week's news. I also publish the Groundwater Exchange, which is a website that collects and organizes resources for SGMA implementation from DWR, the State Water Board, NGOs, and others. There are pages on projects and actions such as groundwater recharge, as well as pages on avoiding undesirable results, a video gallery, an intro to SGMA in both English and Spanish, and a bi-monthly SGMA implementation newsletter. I invite you to check it out at groundwaterexchange.org. There are more office hour sessions in the works. On April 21st, we'll be discussing water futures, the mysterious water futures, and other office hour sessions are being announced shortly, so be sure to sign up to be notified of upcoming webinars and events. And speaking of upcoming events, next Monday, April 18th, I'll be marking 15 years of publishing California Water News website. So I've invited my fellow California Water News colleagues together, Lois Henry from SJV Water, Don Wright from Water Rights, and Michael Campana from Water Wired for a panel discussion moderated by Stantec's Lisa Butler. It's called The Secret Life of Water Bloggers. So I hope you'll join us for that. The links to register are in the chat. So today's session is all about answering your questions. So if you have a question for Anecita, please put it in the chat. You can access the chat by clicking on the chat icon on the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, you can raise your virtual hand by clicking on the reactions emoji on the Zoom menu bar and choosing the option to raise your hand. So I'm assisted today by Diana Vaz-Gonzalez with Civic Well, formerly the Local Government Commission, so she'll be helping me out with the chat. So, and with that, let's get started. Anecita Agustinez has served as DWR's Tribal Policy Advisor since August of 2013. Anecita has over 30 years of advocacy experience on behalf of California's Native American tribes. She provides policy support and recommendations regarding tribal issues to the Director and Chief Deputy Director, and has been actively engaged with DWR's projects and programs, assisting with tribal consultation and development of DWR's tribal consultation policy. Welcome, Anecita. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you to and good morning and good afternoon to our audience. Thank you for joining us. It's always an honor and a pleasure to speak on water issues. And as a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and living my life in California, covering California issues, and being able to work on behalf of tribes not only in California but across the nation with some federal actions. It really is a passion of a job for me. I can't think of anything I actually would rather be doing in where we are and what we're facing in California. And so this is something that is really dear to my heart. And and I respect so much the audience that you bring together. Chris, many I know in the audience, just looking at some of the names, are experts in the field of water. And so I'm in great debt to many of you who I've called upon for advice and support. And we do that in the water world, support one another and follow our work. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for being here. I think starting with at least when I came on the scene in my 15 years, we've seen Governor Jerry Brown. He had some executive orders dealing with tribal issues, and Newsom has also had some executive orders addressing tribal issues. And I do think that seems to be a much more attention to tribes and Native Americans right now, especially, with everything that's going on with climate change and all that. And so one thing that I'm hearing a lot that I thought about this morning is, people are doing a lot of land acknowledgements when they start their events. And I was like, well, okay, I'm sitting here in Chico. People may not know, I moved up here to Northern California last year. So I'm in Chico, and if I want to do a land acknowledgement, so how do I go finding, what tribe is is this land? What tribes are in my area? What's the best way?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. And number one is just to be open and aware. And even people in the water world, I think, are very much open and aware. The fact that we know water runs through many boundaries and jurisdictions, we're already aware of the counties and the state and those political boundaries. I think being aware that political boundaries also apply to tribal ancestral land, not only sovereign fee land and trust land. There's various types of tribal lands. There is an app website. I think it's native.cal.native.c. I forget the moment, but if you put your, we'll locate that link. But if you open that up and you type in your zip code, it will actually give you land that you're on. The other website and tool is the Sigma data finder and DWR has. You could actually go over your GSA boundary and take a look at that. And you scroll over that, it'll actually show you tribal lands, but it only applies to trust land with federal boundaries. It will not have ancestral land. So majority of California, as you know, is on ancestral land, and less than 2% is under tribal control. So majority of California you'll be on ancestral homeland, and in Chico area that would be the Mechoopda tribal lands, and there's many other tribes up there, and aside of Mechoopda, that is a federally recognized tribe, but you've got the Concow and the Wintus up in that area who are not federally recognized. The Native American Heritage Commission is also another state resource that you could send an email to or check out their resources, and I believe their website will have that data app viewer. They also publish the California Digital Atlas. And that digital atlas has a lot of information on the California tribal lands for California. And that was just published about a year ago. But the digital atlas is a really great start. It also helps you with some of the language territories, and that is a lot of how tribal lands were developed through those family clans and family groups of speaking the same language. And so a lot of tribal names come from those linguistic names that you'll see in that digital atlas.
Okay, great. One question that I've long had that I'm looking forward to asking you today is, I've heard you talk about how when you're dealing with tribes, it's a government to government discussion, or government to government consultation. So what exactly do you mean by that, and how is that different than the way we might work with other state agencies or local entities?
I think if we step back to how you opened up, even the first line of questioning of land acknowledgement. When you acknowledge the land, and thank you for putting the links in, Nell and Lisa. Those are the links I was talking about. Is you're acknowledging that this who you are, as a citizen of the earth. You're acknowledging that, and you're paying respect to people who have come before us, and also who are still present. And you also mentioned about policies under Newsom and Brown, and so a lot of times, especially in the work we do as a state representative for Department of Water Resources, we talk about community engagement, community outreach. We also use that term stakeholder, which is a term that I wish to see taken out of our everyday parlance, because stakeholders in itself, I look at that as a negative term of how we engage with our communities. And when we say stakeholders, it also divides who our audience is. And number one is that tribes do not look at themselves as stakeholders. They look at themselves as governments. And a government to government relationship is acknowledging those political boundaries that we would normally give to local agencies. And oftentimes in state policies, the local agencies are called out above tribes, or not, or tribes not at all. Even in policies of guidelines and regulations, you will not see tribal interests put as local, state, and federal, and tribal. That's something that we really have to be able to say. When we say state and federal, we say tribal, because that's an existing government. We always assume local governments, and I've talked to lawmakers, they go, well, it's assumed, they're there. But if you don't see it, it's not going to be there. And the way we have to interpret guidelines, if it's not written in that guidelines and you know, a T cross and I dot it, it is not going to get translated to the general public. I think Newsom really set the process going with Executive Order B1011, and that was you know, way back in 2011. And when Newsom assumed office, he codified that and actually rolled that into N1519. And an early process that he did in 2019. But what B1011 did, it established the role of tribal liaisons in state departments, and also established the office of a tribal advisor under the governor. And I was appointed in 2013 to Department of Water Resources executive team. That was a position that never existed before. And that was in direct response to Governor Brown's order B1011, where different departments were finding opportunities to have tribal liaisons. Before that, though, we did have a tribal liaison, but that person was pretty much, you know, in a program or a division. And so they did not have the authority to speak on behalf of the department or to conduct government to government consultations. So there has to be a delegated authority on behalf of the department of who's representing the Department of Water Resources in true government to government consultation. Tribes are saying we want decision makers at the tables for a true government to government consultation. And that really is what it is. And you can have a liaison or any other designated staff with that delegated authority in a government to government consultation with a tribe who often delegates it as well. Otherwise, we just can't have, you know, governors speaking to each other, or our tribal leaders cannot be at every meeting. So there is a lot of that government to government delegation that is done on both sides, not only by state, but also by tribal governments themselves. And since that time of Newsom's executive order, he has also put out many other far-reaching policies that are still being interpreted now that will have a very much a lasting effect on government to government relations. You mentioned land acknowledgement and land back. 2 years ago, the governor issued out N5420, which is called the Apology Executive Order, which established a Truth and Healing Council. And the Truth and Healing Council is to meet every 5 years, publish a draft recommendation of listening sessions it conducts on a yearly basis, establish a committee for doing those listening sessions, and then in the 5th year, issue out recommendations and a report. And not only, and it's to address whatever that Truth and Healing Council feels are the priorities to address the, well, and the governor said it for the very first time in any type of public venue in front of many tribal leaders, because it was done on the eve of Native American Day of that year, a formal apology on the behalf of the state of California to California tribal citizens for genocide and the practice of slavery, the practice of bounties that was in our state legislative sessions in our very first governor, Peter Burnett. So there's a lot of good things going on. It's really forward-thinking policies that are being put forth by this administration.
Yeah, and I don't think I really quite well, I know I didn't understand what are some of the history of you know, the whole United States and in Indian tribes until I went to college. And it was quite eye-opening. And I know we're not going to get into that today, but I think everybody should go back and, you know, read some of it, because it was pretty not nice. Bad. It was pretty bad. I'll just say it.
And I'd love to come around to that government to government question if we have time, because there is a process for a consultation process that really you need to understand, you know, the protocols of that engagement and what is a successful meeting and outcomes of a government to government consultation, and what consultation means to tribes in itself. That could be a session on its own of how to conduct a formal consultation and steps leading up to ongoing practice of consultation, because it's not a one and done thing. It's, you know, we have to do various types of consultation pursuant to, you know, amended CEQA AB 52, as well as under the executive orders I mentioned, as well as consultation policies from various departments within state and outside of state. There's a lot of local agencies, counties, boards of supervisors that are adopting consultation policies.
Yeah, and well, let's talk a little bit more about consultation, because that was the next question I had on the list here, which is when are agencies required to consult with tribes?
I think agencies are required to consult with tribes on everything they do. It shouldn't be, well, do we consult on this or not? And that's sometimes when people look at consultation, they're like, well, do we really have to? What does this mean? Obviously, you have, federal and state regulations that require it. It's a matter of law under CEQA, Section 106 under NEPA, various other policies that are there. But a good management practice for anyone in business with the state is even if you have a project that you don't think is going to have a tribal effect or tribal interests, you're talking about, oh, we need to connect with our community. You're already consulting with your community. Tribes are a citizen of that community, not only of their tribes, but also of the state of California. They hold that citizenship, and they should not be like, well, somebody making the decisions of whether tribes should be included or not included. And so I look at anything that we do should have that openness and thinking about who are your citizens, who are the communities. We automatically think of minorities. We think about translating documents to other languages. I mean, we're thinking of those communities, but we're not thinking of tribal citizens as, and we're not a minority or an ethnic race group. We are a separate, government that should be considered. And the citizens of California, I mean, not only do you have tribal citizens that are tribal citizens of a California Native American tribe, but you also have tribal citizens from other tribes, such as myself. I'm not from California. I'm a Navajo citizen, but also have tribal interests that are considered a tribe or a tribal person in California. And so that is something. And when I talked about B1011, what was important about B1011, it also put into a definition California Native American tribe. You'll see that in many state statutes and regulations, especially at DWR, it defines California Native American tribe as a federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribe. So there's no distinction in state policy of how whether you consult. I'm using the words tribes, I'm thinking in that whole term, a California Native American tribe, federally and non-federally recognized. And we have the largest amount of tribes in the United States. There's over 110 federally recognized tribes and over 70 plus non-federally recognized tribes. So that's almost 200 tribes that we consult with and that we're required to consult with. And you think about 576 tribes in the United States alone, that's quite a number of tribes. And you think of populous states like Arizona, and you would think that would have a large number of tribes. I think it's less than 30. Oregon and Washington, very small numbers compared to California. And then it's a state like Texas, I think they have 4. And so, that are recognized tribes in the state of Texas alone, which is, I find every time I think of Texas, I always want to ask a Texas lawmaker what happened there.
So you have some questions that I see that are coming in, and I think you just answered the question about how does DWR work with non-recognized California tribes. I think they're probably meant federal recognition. So, and what I got from you is you recognize all tribes, whether they're federally recognized or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Another question that's come in, because I try to take the questions that our attendees submit. This one says, in the State Water Board's needs assessment report, it was noted that data from tribal water systems was lacking, and thus they could not fully evaluate the status of tribal water systems. Has sufficient data been gathered? If so, what are the results? If not, how does the state address human right to water in regards to tribal lands?
Okay.
That's a lot of question there.
Yeah, those are really great questions, Jesus. Regarding needs assessment, I can't speak for the board, but I can tell you that Department of Water Resources has pretty much that same experience. We were conducting various reports, needs assessments through our IRWM, Integrated Regional Water Management program, as well as the CDAG report, which was a drought assessment report from the 2014 drought. And the same issues came up, lack of data. And the same thing came up in the GSA world of working with tribes. Because of what you mentioned earlier, Chris, about not learning about California's history and not having enough, and that's probably a common experience for many people of just never being taught history of what has happened to California's tribes or tribes in general, is because of the government, the local, state government, federal government's policies of genocide and what they have done to California tribes. Tribes have a very much big distrust of state government or any kind of government. They don't participate much in the census. There's been big push in this last 2020 census of trying to get true tribal numbers listed. They won't answer those questions. They won't answer needs assessment. There is a big distrust. And because of the history of water rights in general, tribes are reluctant to share water well data and with the government, because they're thinking that anything you share with the government, they'll use against you, which has been the history and which has proven true many times over and over. So there is that lack of distrust. And I don't think that we will really get to an area when the tribes were really truly trusting of state government. It's a long time to come. We see experiences and some positive experiences. Like I have to shout out to the Karuk tribe. They have been a tribe that is very much wanting to share data because they feel that anything they share will help benefit their progress and what they wish to do and how they wish to be viewed within their community as citizens, as a tribal government, and as protectors of the water and nature that they do so much of. But that's a great example where they go, no, we want to share this data, versus tribes, even if they were to collect state funds, for instance, under GSA, we were able to provide well monies for well enhancement or digging wells. We, as a state agency, we require, if you are on non-tribal lands, to provide that well data to us. So we have that in our systems of analysis. We could not force a tribe, if it was elective or voluntary, for them to share that well data, even though they were receiving state monies, which they're entitled to receive, to do something on their tribal land. But because it was on their trust land and it was a decision by their tribal government, we had to honor that request of not forcing them to share data. And so you have to create that relationship through that government to government consultation. And then you also have to acknowledge that this is a government that is creating a policy of its own, and acknowledge that policy and accept that policy. And because we're not always going to like what a neighboring state would do, or a neighboring country would do, and we would have to respectfully request that, even though we felt it was against our best interests as a state government. You have to look at tribes that way, and nurture those relationships, and hopefully those barriers will get knocked down. As also, there's an evolution. They see that the state is more willing to provide information, or you share that data under some confidential agreements, and you get what you need. You may not be a public document, but there's information there, or data that's shared. So it's oftentimes you would consider doing some type of governance agreement, confidential MOUs, or you would do NDAs, non-disclosure agreements of information. If that information was truly needed and we had to have it, I would recommend going that route for my agency or department to consider, because you just have to use whatever means are at your disposal within reason, and try to get that. And even if those were declined by the tribe, then we just did everything we could to try to do it. And it's oftentimes the tribe will say no. No means no, basically. It's non-negotiable.
And it's important to respect that, definitely.
Mhm.
Another question that's come in is there funding for tribes to do their own internal needs assessment? Do you know?
It depends on the program. And what we try to do is, we try to make sure if it's a new program, that guidelines and regulations will be able to do that. I mean, it's not often that you see a tribal set aside in a grant funding program. It really depends on how, what was the intent of the legislative action. And if there's enough, room in that to make that a possibility, I would love to see more of that happen. We were able to do something like that with the drought, small community drought relief program. That was, if you recall, $500 million to the state last summer as a drought response, $200 million for multi-urban drought relief, $100 million to groundwater, then $200 million for small community drought. That was a first come, first serve, non-competitive grant process. So we felt comfortable being able to kind of like knowing that tribes would not be an early comer, or with be prepared with that. We actually put out the drought relief in phases, because we wanted to make sure, and it was small communities, so that was 3,000 units or less, or communities of 3,000 or less, or hookups of 3,000 or less, and that pretty much includes all the tribes. And so we did it in phases, so that way small communities who weren't quite ready with an application, as fast as you could, so to speak, because it was first come, first serve, we spread it out so that communities could review it, knew about it, and had our technical assistance to create applications. And so departments and agencies, you have discretions in how you put out your funding. And if it's at all possible to do set asides, or to mark up funds for specific communities, especially the underrepresented communities that are not there with grant writers or all the engineering in place already with a request to be able to have those communities not miss out on these funding opportunities.
So I have another question that has come in. Do you think NGOs have a role to play in working with tribes to address water needs and priorities? And what advice would you give to NGOs to do so in a respectful way and build trusting relationships?
Yes, I think there is a lot of debt owed to the NGOs in the tribal community. Oftentimes, tribes are in a resurgence at the moment. They have a lot more economic prosperity. There has been the ARPA funds have really done a lot to help with infrastructure going forward. So they're in this development phase. Plus, there has been an education, like maybe 2 decades worth of education of its own citizens now coming back to be tribal administrators, to be tribal leaders, tribal attorneys in all phases of tribal management. And so you're getting tribal governments that in the past would be very distrustful, and you're getting a younger, I mean, I can tell you how many tribal councils I've been meeting over the years, and they are, well, I'm just shooting up in age, and they're getting younger. I mean, they're in their 30s and 40s, and they're coming already with a world of experience that some of their leaders 20 years ago probably did not have, and they see the world differently. And so they also see the world differently through the eyes of NGOs as allies. And I think the allyship is very important because, prior to this resurgence that I spoke of, the allies of NGOs were really all that a tribe could hope for. Can they assist us with this grant? Can they help us with some training? Can they be volunteers with a tribal event? I mean, those are long established relationships. I've also seen NGOs in a space where they can go in to help organizations be a neutral party oftentimes when you don't have a state entity involved, but the NGOs can make that work, because oftentimes they work closely with the tribe. They are from the community itself, or they have established a long-term good working relationship, and you just build upon that. But I see a lot of good support for NGOs into that space, and working closely with tribes. So there's only room to grow as more and more NGOs, and there's tribal GOs. There are now a lot of tribes creating their own nonprofits in order to do work in that space, because they find, on that government to government basis, sometimes that might be limiting. So then they've created nonprofits to help them with contracting, grant management, and be able to be the grant vehicle to get state, federal, and local grants. So you'll see a lot of that.
And I'll just add, probably one of the more powerful moments that I ever had attending a conference was I was at the State of the Estuary conference in Oakland, and a woman was there representing Vallejo. I think it was a disadvantaged community. But I thought she said something that I just always remembered, and I think it's good advice. She said, "Don't come into my community and tell me what you're going to do for me. Come into my community and ask how you can help." Because sometimes we get our own ideas on what we think needs to be done for a community. And, that's not the way to go about it, is what I really got from her. So I think it's always good to remember that. Ask, people, what do you need? Not, here's what I'm going to do for you. Okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of how the state goes about opening up. Here's what we need, and here's what you need to do to help us get to this end post.
So another question coming in. There's very little dollars, very little funding to help tribes with capacity building support. Can every grant funding route have some of that for disadvantaged communities and tribes, because implementation grants just can't get done without these first steps.
That's very, very true. We in the Department of Water Resources, we did build in capacity grants in some of our programs, groundwater and IRWM, but it really is dependent upon the grant funding, what type of funding it is. And is the program going to do planning grants in advance of implementation or project grants? And so oftentimes they just send out a grant notice and they expect it to be done all in one time. So really, there really is that need to look at closely how to make sure capacity and support is built into program funding. And oftentimes we're limited, and you'll have to get creative with if you've got limited funding or program budgets to do so. But that is a very good question to keep ahead of any legislative action that says we're here to help underserved, underrepresented, because and then the other thing with not only capacity grants, but the ability that state funding also is a reimbursement process. So you've done all the steps necessary. You're getting $1.5 million of grants to do this project in your small underfunded community already. And then the state tells you, well, we can't advance you until 6 months into the project when you start invoicing us. How do you get a project started? Sometimes we give 25% in advance, unless the statute provides something a little bit more. But there is a big problem when you cannot have funding and reimbursement or direct funding. And so those are the other things in terms of, even if you do capacity building, even if the grant is for capacity building, you've got to have some funding there to even have them turn the lights on into a building where they're going to convene a meeting. And it's sometimes that then this awkward cycle works out, and the communities have to step away from a grant process because they realize they just don't have money to bridge that divide of timing, and the timing is not right unless they've got a great ally that they've worked with that can come in and provide support until they can start getting reimbursement.
So while we're here, let me make sure. Okay, I don't see any more questions from attendees. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. But we're going back to some of our questions that we had beforehand. One of the best examples, I think, of tribal engagement is the North Coast Regional Partnership. I think in the Yurok and the Karuk tribes are very active up there. Why do you think the North Coast Regional Partnership and others have been so successful? And they've managed to, I think they have funding and grants and things going on up there too. So they seem to be very active.
Yes, and and like any community, I've attended their quarterly meetings, and they get there's lots of interests there, interests and diverging interests. You have the North Coast Resource Partnership is pretty much all the counties north of Mendocino, Sonoma County, all the way north to the Oregon border. So you've got maybe 6 counties plus, and you've got over 20 plus tribes in that area. And then you've got very different types of water basins and groundwater basins and watersheds that are in that. So it's so unique. And what they've done, and it's taken them about 15 years of working at it to get it right. That early on, they knew that they needed, and it wasn't always roses. They had, very contentious meetings in the beginning where the tribes were sitting outside a table, not in the middle table, but outside, kind of listening in, like, what do you want us involved? How are we going to be involved? What's up? What's in it for us? Type of thing. Just like any person from the community would say to some new partnership. And they heard commitments. They heard a commitment that, we are committed. We want to have a solid working group. And so they took and I forget the earlier name, but these are under the in the IRWM world, the Integrated Regional Water Management world of DWR, we split the state into 48 funding regions. So this is one funding region, and that shows you how difficult these funding regions are, what I describe, and that's very typical. Jurisdictions, counties, cities, tribes in one funding region. So if they changed their name from whatever it was, a resource management group, which is what these IRWM groups are. It's because it's a local managed group, to a partnership. And they changed it to the North Coast Resource Partnership. And then because they had tribal input, the tribe says, if we're going to come to the table, we want to be partners. We aren't just no longer a stakeholder. We're partners in this. We want the funding group to acknowledge who we are. And they incorporated tribal participation, not only in their governance board, but in their peer review committee, in their technical review committee. And they actually funded a tribal coordinator. So the tribal coordinator worked with all the tribes to establish how these 6 seats would service 20 plus tribes and be a voice to go back to the tribes. So that coordinator convenes meetings with the tribal interests in advance of their quarterly meetings, or as oftentimes as it's needed. They elect their spokespeople, and then they participate, and then all the tribes are invited to come to all the meetings. But you have those elected bodies there on the governing board sitting at the main table, helping make decisions. And in fact, for the last 3 terms, there has been a tribal delegate elected as co-president or co-chapter person of that in that elected body, representing the Crook tribe. So and other tribal representatives. So they really took partnership to address those tribal concerns, and they gained the trust of their tribal partners, and they incorporated and changed their constitutional body to reflect that there was a governing role and respect for those tribal concerns, and how to incorporate it in grants management for them.
Yeah, I can tell they've been very successful. Let's see, I think another question. Okay, here we go. Is there an example of a tribal coalition in Southern or Central California that is focused on water or climate resilience?
Yes, there's quite a number in Southern California. There's some successful conservancies, land conservancies that have been doing quite a bit in Southern California, especially on Kumeyaay lands, and that has been going through. Dr. Stanley Rodriguez and Michael Connors are very much involved in that coalition. They also address climate change for that. I think those are local organizations, but statewide, if you were to look at, and Diana, if you could do me the favor and post a link to the North Coast Resource Partnership for our viewers, because I just wanted to mention that, because they have an incredible webpage showing who they are, so you can get an idea of their examples. But the other link would be to the California Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. So we have a state historic preservation officer, one office, and tribes can elect to recognize a tribal TIPO. And so the TIPOs form their own coalition or own group, and they address a lot of these concerns on environmental concerns, climate work. And some of those TIPOs themselves are experts in that field and convene meetings for that. And so I look at them as a really good resource partnership regarding climate change and a lot of issues on water. And then in Central California, the Honorable Ron Good, Chairman Good of the North Fork Mona tribe, is a renowned, national expert on what he brings to indigenous science knowledge, the tribal ecological knowledge world with cultural burn, metal restoration, and all things water. He really is, I look at him as a mentor and someone that I trust and love to follow his work. He's also the, one of the voices that got tribal engagement started at DWR. And this was before my time. And I have to really give, great praise to Barbara Cross, who was in tribal liaison before I began. As you're probably familiar, our audience with the California Water Plan, that the California Water Plan gets updated every 5 years by statute since the late 50s. And every time it's been updated, not until 2009 were tribes even consulted or asked, well, what can you do? What is the water plan? How do we get tribal interests? And so from that early input that Barbara Cross and Chairman Good planted was creating a tribal advisory committee and then convening our very first tribal water summit. So since that time of 2013, we've had 3 summits, 2009, 2013, and 2018. We're convening 2023 next April. In fact, it's going to be 1 year from today, April 10th, 11th, and 12th of 2023. So stay tuned. You're all going to be invited to that. So that's 4 years, 4 summits for the addressing the California Water Plan. And this year we're going to actually have a tribal chapter within the California Water Plan that'll be written by the tribal community. And they'll develop the content and what we're going to cover. And that will be the first time we're going to have not just a tribal content, a tribal chapter itself. And prior, the last 3 water plans, we've had tribal review, we've had tribal input, but never their own content. In 2013, we had resource management strategies prepared by the tribes. We did a tribal resource management strategy, as well as a tribal, not a chapter, but some tribal water stories that we incorporated into that. So this is going to be really groundbreaking for the water plan.
Great. Just checking my list of questions here. Okay, so how have tribes been participating in SGMA?
I think rather loosely. SGMA is we're seeing more interest now that the GSPs, groundwater sustainable plans, have been put out, because the GSAs, have to send out to everybody within their beneficial use within their GSA, their groundwater sustainable agency. Early on, there was quite a lot of interest until the tribes realized, oh, we're an adjudicated basin. So we're not going to be subject to SGMA. We're going to have to do adjudicated plans. That affected a lot of the Southern California tribes and some of the coastal tribes that were in adjudicated basins. And then our big effort was the critically overdrafted basins. And tribes really fall within high or medium or to low priority basins. So all of these levels really kind of like, you had high interest because SGMA was so groundbreaking in the fact that it was probably the first law in the state of California that acknowledged Federal Reserve rights for California tribes, that the Federal Reserve water rights will be respected in full. And so there was like, oh, wow, we've got this law. That means that we're going to be a partner in all of this. And then when we started looking how the GSAs are to be formed, a tribe could not be its own GSA because they had to be a local authority. And so tribes had to be a part of a GSA and develop those partnerships. And then that's where the big rub was. Some GSAs were very inviting, some basically closed their doors, and tribes really, really had to, with some support from DWR, go in and really break down several doors. And one of those, and I'll have to say it's because it's all part of the public knowledge, is Siskiyou County. They told the Kuruk tribe, no, thank you, but no, thank you. We have Quartz Valley, 1 tribe is enough. And you don't have land within our area. And they say, well, this is our ancestral land. We follow the water. And so this is something, and we have data. We want to show you our data. So when you're dealing with this basin, you're understanding our ability to protect the fish and the environment. And so it took a while. We had to actually use groundwater monies under our technical capacity arm, hire a facilitator to work with the county and the tribes to allow for some part of participation within that groundwater basin. And there's also a story in Southern California where 5 bands were wanted to be a part of a GSA, and they initially were a part of a GSA. Then the GSA changed its format and told the tribes, you can, you're no longer a member of this GSA, but you can become ex officio members if you wish. And the irony there is that that's 5 bands of tribes in southern upper San Diego County. And if you were to look at the land of jurisdiction that the GSA covers, the tribal land itself is over 70% of that basin. And the tribes are saying, how are you going to give a solid GSP groundwater sustainable plan in January of this year without tribal input? And they said, oh, we'll do our data modeling and we'll capture it that way. So you still have this distrust, and it goes back to how we began. You make strides, you get laws that say we're going to respect groundwater, Federal Reserve water rights in full, but then you don't respect the tribal partners themselves to be part of that management or decision-making process in itself, even as we speak now. Some areas where GSAs have been successful with tribal participation is when the tribe stayed on the outside. Oh, you can stay as an advisory capacity. And because of, and so that GSA didn't feel threatened, but the tribe made a decision to do so. And a couple of reasons why is people don't realize when you have tribal lands that are under federal reservation, that is called trust land. A lot of tribes are investing and developing fee land, and fee land is obviously non-trust land, and sometimes fee land may even outsize the actual trust land acreage because a tribe is choosing to invest in farming or other economic development, housing, buildings, shopping centers, different things like that. In this instance, where the tribe chose to be an advisory capacity is because they had significant fee lands and they pay taxes like any other state citizen to the county and local, et cetera. And they wanted to be part of the decisions on what is going to happen to their fee land because that's under that local jurisdiction, which they choose it to be under that local jurisdiction. So there's so many different ways that tribes have participated in SGMA. So that's one way, and that's kind of duplicate across a couple of basins where tribes will have kind of, not even in an informal basis, but they'll tune in, listen in, follow what a GSA is doing, just to keep apprised and abreast of what's being done on their land interests.
Okay, great. Just checking my list of questions. Oh, no, okay, we got that one.
Can't believe
Okay.
the time.
I know. So yeah, if anyone have questions, please put them in the chat, but we're kind of wrapping it down to the end. But let's talk for a moment. There's been a lot of stories in the news of late of land being returned to tribes so tribes can manage it again. Why are we seeing so many of these stories, and what are the potential benefits of returning land to tribes?
I think that I welcome this process so much. I think one of that is that if we look at state managed lands, a lot of state managed lands is just dormant, and this whole park system, how was it developed? If you look at the idea of the park system developed for recreation, and when you think of recreation, it was for the pursuit of activities, not for just letting land be as it is or changing its needs. Tribes need access to ancestral land to maintain ceremony. It's part of their creation. Their ancestral lands, many have been displaced from where where their home is, where their ancestors are buried. And so there's this need of in your cosmology to be able to have where your land is. And it really is disruptive for a tribe. And people don't realize that many tribes have been displaced and moved out of their areas. Why don't we see tribes in the Bay Area? Because they've been all rounded up and moved up to Round Valley. And that's why you call it Round Valley Reservation. That's like, many tribes having to learn to have to coexist on a reserve, and it was set up by military. These are reserves, and you were told not to leave, and you couldn't leave, in the early days of reservation systems. Plus, there was treaties that were negotiated with California tribes that were never ratified, and they literally were blocked away and not ratified. That set up reservations throughout California with significant amount of land. So tribes feel that distrust. There's a need to restore what was given and lost and taken away. And because where we are now, knowing what we know about climate and energy and preservation, that we know that indigenous science and knowledge is the way to go to restore land properly. And so, yeah, I know where my little buzzer went off. Could go on and on about this, but I think there's great examples of co-management of land, and the idea that when we replant, we can return to traditional native plants that have been taken away from certain areas because our management was to beautify, not return to its natural order of what the land actually was given to us in its natural state.
Okay, so here's the last question, maybe perhaps the most important question, but I think you've touched on a lot of these things today. But what would be the most important things that you would want any member of the general public to know and understand about Native American tribes?
I think this was told to me by a tribal elder, and every time I'd see her, she says, "We're still here." And she meant it for herself, because I was so happy to see her. She goes, "I'm still here." And now she says, "We're still here." And I think that is kind of a mantra I always think of when I think of that's even my own upbringing, and my tribal citizen status is like, we are still here, and we're thriving, and we're living, and we can be partners. And I think understanding the history, like you mentioned, what is the California history, because when you understand that history, we've been tribes and in general, Indian people have been, we've been on the fringe on so many things. I mean, there was a talk of reparations, when there's reparations given for all these other atrocities to other groups. There's never really been reparations for Native Americans for anything. We got an apology. And when that was done, everyone says, okay, well, how are you going to follow that up? Where's the land? And so then we got the Truth and Healing Council. And then just in mid-March of this year, Governor Newsom unveiled $100 million for land restoration and land back for tribes. So there's follow-up. But I do know that, we're still here, we're still thriving. There's many citizens to be yet to come, and generations to be born that will be beneficiaries of these policies.
Okay, great. Well, we are right at 1 o'clock straight up. So I want to thank you, Anecita, for a very engaging discussion. And thank you everyone for attending today. And thank you, Deanna, for handling the chat. We will be, this session was recorded. It will be posted on Maven's Notebook in the YouTube channel, and a follow-up with the resources that were posted in the chat, and a link to the recording will follow in a few days. So thank you again, Anecita. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor. I wish I could meet you all in person someday.
Someday. We're almost getting back there. Yeah.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for being here today.